When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. The night is long, the air is still. Only what must continue, continues. The pillar stands where it was placed, not where it grew. It did not grow here, did not send roots into this floor, did not reach toward whatever light this ceiling admits. It grew elsewhere, in soil it will never return to, under a sky it hasn't seen since it was cut. What stands here now is the result of that growth, transported and set vertical, asked to do something the living tree never did, to hold a weight above it, stationary, for as long as the structure requires. The weight above the pillar is constant. Beams, joinery, the layers of the roof and whatever the roof carries, all of this presses down through the pillar's length, arriving at the base as a force that the floor receives through the pillar. The force does not pause at night. It does not reduce in the cold months or ease in the still hours before dawn. It is the weight of what is above, present at every moment of every year, transferred through the wood in a continuous column of compression from the capital to the base. The pillar has been receiving this force since it was set in place. Not resisting it, that framing suggests a contest, and there is no contest here. The pillar receives the force the way the floor receives the pillar, by being present, by having the structure to transmit what arrives at the top to what waits at the bottom, by being the interval between the weight above and the ground below. The force passes through. The wood is not diminished by the passing. The wood is slowly changed by it. And the change is not the same as diminishment, though they can be difficult to tell apart before enough time has passed to see which one it was. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. To other chains, the connections multiply, the structure grows denser. What was fluid becomes viscous. What was viscous becomes firm. What was firm becomes hard. Each stage less reversible than the last. Each stage further from liquid, closer to the surface it is becoming. This is hardening, not drying. The distinction matters because it means the liquid does not need to lose mass to become a surface. Nothing leaves. Everything that was in the liquid is still in the surface. The components, the water the liquid carried, the structure that linking built. The water does not evaporate out, it participates. The hardening needs water. In dry conditions it slows almost to stillness, the linking too sparse to build density. In humid conditions, in air carrying more water than ordinary room air, it deepens. The surface that would take days to form in dry air forms in hours when the air is wet. The surface hardens fastest when the air is most wet. This reverses the usual logic of surfaces, of paints and varnishes and coatings that require dryness to cure, that are ruined by moisture introduced too early. Here the moisture is not the enemy of hardening. The moisture is the condition. Remove it and the hardening stalls. Provide it and the linking continues. The structure grows. The surface approaches what it is becoming. To harden this surface, you close it in with humidity. You make a small, damp dark. You surrender the timing to the chemistry. You wait for the material to do what only the material can do, which is to become, in the conditions you have arranged for it, the surface that the conditions permit. Before it was a pillar, it was a tree. The rings visible in the end grain, if the end grain is exposed, if light falls on it at the right angle, are the years of that tree's life, each ring the record of one growing season, the boundary between rings, the boundary between one year and the next. The rings are not uniform. In years of adequate rain and mild temperature, the cells the tree produced were larger, the ring wider, the wood of that year slightly less dense. In years of constraint, drought, late frost, competition from neighboring trees for light and water, the cells were smaller, the ring narrower, the wood denser for the difficulty. The history of the ground where it grew is in the wood, not as memory, as structure, the configuration of cells that each year's conditions produced, preserved in the arrangement of fiber that the tree built. Each ring has two parts: the early wood, produced in spring, when growth is rapid and conditions are generous, with larger cells and thinner walls, and the late wood, produced as the growing season closes, the cells smaller, the walls thicker, the wood denser and darker. The boundary between early wood and late wood within a single ring is the boundary between spring and autumn, between the beginning of the year and its end. The dark bands are the hard seasons. The pale bands are the open ones. Both are necessary to the strength of what grew from them. The years of abundance and the years of constraint are both present, laid concentrically outward from the center, the oldest years at the core and the most recent years just inside where the bark was. The bark itself is gone now, removed when the tree was prepared for this use. What remains is the wood, all of it, every year from the first to the last, standing in the cross-section as the complete record of a life that ended when it was cut and that persists as structure in what was made from it. The center of the pillar is the oldest wood. It grew first before any of the rings outside it existed, when the tree was young and the trunk was narrow. The cells at the center are the cells of the tree's first years, smaller, denser, produced when the tree was establishing itself. Around those first years, the subsequent years accumulated, each ring added to the outside of what existed, the tree growing outward as it grew older, the center remaining fixed while the diameter expanded around it. The core that formed first is now the structural core of the pillar. The years accumulated around it are the body. The years of load that came after are present in both, invisibly, as density within density. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. When the tree was cut, the wood began a different kind of change. The living tree moved water constantly, from roots, through trunk, through branches to leaves, the transpiration stream carrying dissolved minerals upward, the wood cells of the sapwood participating in this movement, the heartwood already retired from active transport but still containing the moisture that the living tissue held. When the tree was cut, the movement stopped. The cells that had carried water no longer carried water. The moisture they contained began slowly to leave. Drying is not simple. The water in wood exists in two conditions: free water held loosely in the cavities of the cells, and bound water held within the cell walls themselves. Free water leaves first, evaporating from the surface as the cells empty. When the free water is gone, the bound water begins to leave, held more tightly, releasing more slowly, and as it releases, changing the walls that held it. As bound water leaves the cell walls shrink. The cell walls that were swollen with moisture become, as that moisture departs, thinner, denser, drawn closer together. The spaces that water occupied close. The fibers that ran through the living wood tighten against each other. What was soft with water becomes hard without it. Not broken, not diminished, but compressed into itself. The structure that growth produced now pulled inward by the departure of what growth had filled it with. This tightening is not uniform across the pillar's cross-section. The outside dries first. As the outer wood loses moisture, it would shrink. But it is constrained by the inner wood, which is still wet and has not yet shrunk. The outer wood, prevented from shrinking freely, develops tension at the surface. Later, when the inner wood dries, it would shrink. But now the outer wood has already set, and the inner wood is constrained in turn. The pillar carries this record of sequential drying in its internal stresses. The outer wood in tension, the inner wood in compression, the two in a quiet equilibrium that the years of seasoning established and that the wood has held ever since. The drying took years, not the surface drying. That happens quickly within weeks of felling. The interior of a large trunk dries slowly, the moisture gradient moving from the outside inward at a rate determined by the density of the wood and the conditions of the air around it. The pillar was cut, prepared, and seasoned before it was shaped and placed. The pillar that entered this structure was already different from the tree that was cut. The drying had already changed it. Denser, harder, the internal stresses settled into their long equilibrium. The fiber prepared for what would come next. And then it was placed, and the weight arrived. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. Under long compression, wood changes. Not quickly. This is not the change of quenching, not the change of fracture, not even the change of a growing season. This is the change of decades, of the slow response of fiber to a force that never releases. The wood moves imperceptibly in the direction the force applies. Beams sag slightly over centuries. Joints seat more deeply into their mortises. The pillar, compressed from above, becomes over years incrementally denser at its core. The fibers press closer by the weight that never lifts. This is not failure. Failure would be fracture. The sudden release of accumulated stress. The wood unable to carry what is asked of it. What happens here is different. The wood accommodates. The fibers shift into a configuration that distributes the load more evenly across the cross-section. The small voids that seasoning left in the structure close under the sustained pressure. The wood settles into the load the way the load settles into the wood. A mutual adjustment, slow and continuous, happening at the scale of fiber and cell wall, rather than at any scale the eye can follow. A pillar does not resist its load. It becomes the shape that carrying requires. Each year of load finds the pillar slightly different from how the previous year's load found it. Slightly denser, slightly more aligned to the force, slightly more what a column of wood under that precise weight, and in that precise position, over that precise accumulation of time, becomes. The load does not impose itself on a fixed material. The material responds. The response is the structure. The structure is what stands here. The weight does not diminish the pillar. The weight works on the pillar, and the pillar responds to the weight, and over years the response becomes the pillar's structure. The fiber arrangement is no longer only what the tree grew or the seasoning produced, but what a century of compression has made of it alongside those earlier makings. The pillar is the record of the force it has received, written in the density of the wood, in the subtle compaction at the core, in the settling and seating that the years of load have worked into the grain. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths the air holds its density. An old pillar carries the record of what it has carried, not visibly. The changes that decades of load produce are not the changes of weathering or wear, not the surface changes that the eye can follow from year to year. They are interior changes, the slow settling of fiber into the direction of force, the gradual closing of small voids in the structure, the grain reorienting itself around the vertical axis of compression. The pillar that has stood for a century is not the pillar that was placed. It is what that pillar became under the specific weight of this structure over the specific duration of this use. The load left its geometry in the wood. Where the force was concentrated, the wood responded to the concentration. Where the load transferred through the joinery, the wood seated itself more exactly into the joint, not loosening, as wear loosens, but fitting more precisely, as sustained contact under pressure fits. The pillar learned the shape of what it carries the way any material learned the shape of the force it receives over time, not by understanding it, but by being changed by it, incrementally, in the direction the force consistently applied. The wood is not diminished by this. It is marked. The record of the load is present in the fiber, in the slight compaction at the core, in the geometry of how the grain runs now compared to how it ran when the pillar was placed, in the way the wood has moved into rather than away from the weight. To carry weight for a century is to become, over that century, a more exact record of that weight. The pillar is not what it was. The pillar is what the carrying made of it. The pillar became what it is by doing what it was placed here to do. Each year of load is present in the structure of the wood, not as a ring, not as a line, not as any boundary visible to the eye, but as the incremental record that a year of compression leaves in fiber, added to every year before it and every year that followed. The cross-section that shows the tree's years in its rings also holds, invisibly within those rings, the years of load that came after. The two timescales layered in the same material, the biological time of growth and the structural time of use, inseparable now in the fiber that both produced. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. The pillar stands tonight as it stood last night. There is no visible difference. The compression that this night's load adds to the accumulated compression of every previous night is below any threshold of observation, smaller than the swelling that humidity introduces, smaller than the contraction that cold produces, lost in the ordinary movement of wood through its daily and seasonal cycles. Tonight's addition to the pillar's structure is real and undetectable. It will be real and undetectable tomorrow night as well. The pillar does not accumulate these changes in any way that makes them countable or traceable. There is no record of them except in the density of the wood itself. The wood that is tonight, incrementally denser than it was when it was placed, denser than it was a decade ago, denser than it was last year, denser than it was this morning, by an amount that has no name, that no instrument was built to capture, because it is too small to matter at any single moment and too consequential to ignore across a century. The weight is doing its work at the pace that wood and time permit. Not the pace of the quench, not the pace of fracture or fire, or the sudden crystalline change that a second of cold water can produce. The pace of fiber settling into the direction of force, of cell walls finding the configuration that the sustained load prefers, of a structure becoming, not all at once and not visibly, more exactly what a century of vertical compression asks wood to be. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The weight is doing its work. Quietly, at the pace of slow changes that only become visible when you compare across centuries rather than across years. The pillar receives the weight from above and transmits it to the floor below. And in the interval between receiving and transmitting, in the wood itself, the weight leaves its record. Not as damage, not as wear, not as the gradual exhaustion of a material asked to do more than it can sustain. As the deepening of a structure that is under the load it carries, becoming more fully what the load requires it to be. The tree grew toward light for the years it lived. The wood has been doing something else since, drying into hardness, compressing into density, carrying what was placed above it, and becoming, in the carrying, the pillar that the weight required. The tree is gone. The wood remains. The wood is not what the tree was, and it is not only what the tree made it, and it is not only what the seasoning made it. The wood is what the years since the tree made of it, a column of compressed time, standing in the dark, standing in the light, receiving tonight what it has received every night, adding tonight's increment to the total it has been accumulating since the weight first arrived and the wood first answered. The tree spent its life reaching outward. The pillar has spent its life receiving downward. Both movements left their record in the same material. The rings at the core hold the years of reaching. The density that no ring marks holds the years of receiving. Both are present tonight in the wood that stands here. Neither finished, neither separate from the other. The growth and the load and the long accommodation between them continuous in the fiber. Quiet in the dark, bearing the weight of what is above as it has borne it since the beginning, and will bear it until whatever comes after. It will still be standing when this night ends. It will be, by that small and unmeasurable amount, more what it has been becoming. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. When night falls, the archive remains.